Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back to the deep dive. Last time we immersed ourselves, really deeply, in Joseph Schumpeter's complicated yet profoundly admiring analysis of Karl Marx. We looked at Marx as the prophet, the sociologist, and the economist, a figure whose towering achievement was really rooted in this sweeping historical vision of inevitable capitalist change. It was all driven by sociological forces and a dynamic evolutionary process.
And if Marx stood as the high priest of revolution, the dynamic theorist, the politically charged voice of economic thought, Schumpeter now forces us to swing the pendulum.
Violently.
Violently, yes, to the complete opposite pole. Today, we turn our focus to the man Schumpeter, explicitly and without any reservation, called the greatest of all economists, Marie Esprit Léon Walras.
And this
Deep dive, it's not about political revolution or grand historical forces. It's about the cold, rigorous, and you can almost say beautiful nature of pure scientific analysis.
That distinction right out of the gate is just so critical.
Yeah.
It really sets the stakes for this entire deep dive. Our sources are centered completely on Schumpeter's essay on Walras from 10 Great Economists, with a little bit from Schumpeter's comparative remarks in the foreword. And our mission, really, is to understand precisely why Schumpeter, a man who respected intellectual power in all its forms, held Walras in such uniquely high esteem. Esteem as a pure theorist, I should say, an esteem that just seems to completely eclipse the global popular recognition that someone like Marx gets.
Exactly. Our task is to analyze Walras's singular achievement, which is, of course, the theory of general equilibrium. And in doing that, we have to draw out the stark intentional contrast that Schumpeter just hammered home again and again.
The methodological contrast.
Precisely. The contrast between the analytical tool for understanding static interdependencies on one hand, and the sweeping theory trying to explain historical evolution on the other. For Schumpeter, it seems the highest form of intellectual achievement in economics wasn't prophecy. It was purity and rigor.
Okay, so let's start with that definitive pronouncement. Schumpeter was never one for hedging his bets, and he lays down the marker right in the foreword. He wrote, and I'm quoting here, "Walras is, in my opinion, the greatest of all economists." And he wasn't just talking about the 19th century, he meant all economists, full stop.
It's a stunning statement. Just think about it. Schumpeter, with his encyclopedic knowledge of the field, he's assessing giants like Keynes, Marshall, Adam Smith, Ricardo, all of them. And he picks Walras.
So what were the criteria? It couldn't have been influence, right?
Not at all. The criteria were entirely scientific, completely divorced from policy utility or political influence. Walras's achievement was judged based on one thing: his contribution to pure theory.
The system of economic equilibrium.
That's it. And Schumpeter makes it clear that this achievement stands comparison with the accomplishments of theoretical physics.
Wait, hold on. Comparing economics to theoretical physics is a massive claim. How exactly did Schumpeter justify that? Was it just because Walras used a lot of math, or was there something deeper about the elegance of it?
It was absolutely deeper than just using math. Schumpeter saw in Walras's work the very same kind of attempt to create a closed, comprehensive, logically self-contained system, a system to describe a reality, much like, Newton described mechanics or Maxwell described electromagnetism.
So a universal framework.
A universal framework. The system had to be fully integrated where every single part affects every other part, and Walras proved mathematically that this incredibly complex system had a knowable simultaneous solution. That is the rigor of pure science, developing a universal, abstract, and internally consistent theoretical apparatus.
And this rigor, this is the lens through which Schumpeter is viewing the entire history of modern economic thought. He frames it, in large part, around this dichotomy, Walras versus Marx. Schumpeter states it so clearly they were poles apart.
Exactly. And we really need to define those poles carefully to get what he's saying. Marx was attempting a logical explanation of economic change, of development. Dynamics. From the Greek word dynamis, meaning power or force, he saw capitalism as an evolutionary process, one driven by sociological contradictions, by historical progression. His whole work was about how the system moves, how it fails, and how it ultimately changes itself into something completely new.
So Marx is all about the arrow of time, the forces that are propelling the economy forward toward some predicted, final outcome.
Yes, whereas Walras, by stark contrast, gave us the ultimate expression of statics.
Statics, a snapshot in time.
A perfect snapshot. It's the frictionless perfect state where all the economic forces, supply, demand, prices, costs, are perfectly balanced. They're all reconciled at a single, unchanging moment. Walras created this theoretical apparatus that embraced what he called the pure logic of the interdependence between economic quantities. He focused purely on how the economic system rests, how all of its millions of parts fit together at the same time.
The intellectual separation really couldn't be wider, could it? Marx gives us this sweeping prophecy, a theory of motion trying to explain historical evolution and the ultimate ends of society, while Walras gives us the analytical tool, the rigorous mathematical structure you need to even begin to understand the interdependencies within the economy at rest.
And this is exactly where Schumpeter makes his decisive judgment. Marx's vision, as powerful and as sweeping as it was often technically flawed. He derived his conclusions from methods that Schumpeter considered, frankly, antiquated or incomplete. Walras's technique, on the other hand, by focusing only on the abstract logic, it was virtually unassailable. And for Schumpeter, that internal rigor, that is what defines scientific greatness above everything else.
Okay, here's where we get into the human element, which I think makes Schumpeter's praise so profound. Schumpeter paints this picture of Walras that is almost tragic. He's a solitary genius, fiercely dedicated to this abstract and, frankly, unloved task. The sources make it so clear that this greatness wasn't just handed to Walras. It was painfully earned through a lifetime of dedication and, well, isolation.
That narrative of struggle is absolutely essential for Schumpeter. It's not just color, it's part of the proof of greatness. He identifies Walras's core identity as being defined by his unconditional surrender to one task, the scientific art. His whole life was just exclusive meditation on the problems of pure economics. And Schumpeter noted that Walras's achievement impressed him almost as a natural event.
What does that mean, a natural event?
It means it had its own internal logic, its own inevitability and power. It wasn't genius in the sense of these, random flashes of brilliant insight. It was more like the relentless, irresistible force of a scientific idea that just required one person to dedicate their entire existence to formalizing it.
And Walras was definitely not a natural academic success story. Schumpeter notes that he struggled constantly. He faced all these failures in practical matters early in his life. He failed to get into the prestigious École Polytechnique, which for an aspiring French intellectual at that time was a devastating blow.
A huge blow, yeah.
Then he tried journalism, he tried managing a cooperative bank, various other enterprises. All of them, apparently, with a characteristic lack of success. These early failures in fields that require practicality or political skill, they really underscore the abstract nature of his eventual triumph, don't they?
They absolutely do. And the sources point to this fascinating defining moment for him, a key turning point around 1859, 1860. It was then that Walras became absolutely unshakably convinced of one thing.
That economics had to be mathematical.
It must be treated mathematically. For him, this wasn't just a preference, it was a revelation. It was a core belief. And it transformed his life into this one singular, unwavering focus. He felt this intellectual and philosophical push in that direction. And from that moment on, his dedication to pure mathematical economics was his greatest and really his only strength.
I think the anecdote about his professional life in Lausanne is so key to understanding this singular dedication. When he accepted the chair of economics at the Academy of Lausanne in 1870, it wasn't exactly a globally coveted position, right?
Not at all. It was a provincial university.
He didn't take it for prestige or for some high honor. Schumpeter notes he took it precisely because the position gave him the academic quiet and the time he needed to pursue his single focus, developing pure economic theory.
Absolutely. That position gave him the seclusion he needed to do his life's work. He formally retired in 1892, but he kept his connection as an honorary professor and just continued to refine and defend his work until his death in 1910.
So right to the very end.
Dedicated until the very end. The sheer magnitude of this focus is just hard to overstate. He spent 40 years perfecting a single abstract theoretical model.
But this dedication, it also ensured his isolation. If you contrast Walras's internal intellectual achievement with his external public recognition, the picture is pretty striking. Schumpeter tells us the prestigious Académie des Sciences Morales et Politiques in France just flat out rejected his work.
They did. For decades, he was just toiling in spite of outer and inner difficulties. He was often working entirely without help, without encouragement, without any collaborators.
His dedication was basically seen as eccentricity by his peers.
It was. And Schumpeter mentions that Walras never fully overcame the memory of struggles and failure. This gives his autobiography, apparently, an element of tragic lovers. This image of a brilliant man forever pursuing a profound logical truth that the entire professional world, especially the English-speaking world, was just utterly unwilling to accept.
Okay, but if Walras's math was so rigorous, why did influential figures like Alfred Marshall, who was the definitive economist of that era in the English-speaking world, why did he just ignore him for decades? Doesn't that suggest a practical or, I don't know, a communicative failure that Schumpeter should have factored in?
That is an excellent point, and Schumpeter does address it. But his conclusion is that the fault lay with the audience, not with the purity of the science. The English classics generation, led by Marshall, they found Walras's work too mathematical, too theoretical.
Too French, maybe.
Perhaps a little too Cartesian, yes. Marshall himself favored a more literary, a less formal approach to economics. He wanted it to be accessible. Walras's insistence on the language of mathematics acted as this exclusionary barrier. It ensured that for years he remained a solitary genius pursuing truth rather than popularity or, broad influence. And for Schumpeter, this only elevated Walras's status. He worked for the sake of the science itself, not for the marketability of his ideas.
So his very rigor is what prevented him from achieving early influence. And that self-imposed isolation is precisely what Schumpeter admired. It's like proof that Walras was pursuing truth for its own sake.
Precisely. He was focused on the internal consistency of the apparatus. Which brings us right to the core of his immortal claim, the general equilibrium framework. Walras achieved immortality not by offering quick policy fixes or predicting the next crisis, but by illuminating the internal hidden structure of the entire economy mathematically. The very feat Schumpeter compared directly to the breakthroughs in theoretical physics.
And what's fascinating here is how he went about this. Walras's work, primarily his magnum opus Éléments d'économie politique pure, that is his claim to immortality, it achieved something that was just unprecedented in the history of economics, illuminating the structure of purely economic relationships with, as Schumpeter says, the light of one fundamental principle.
He basically took the nascent ideas of marginal analysis and just scaled them up exponentially. Earlier thinkers, like Cournot, had analyzed the exchange of just two goods and how their prices related. It's relatively straightforward. Walras's genius was expanding that simple analysis to the entire system. All goods, all services, all factors of production land, labor, capital all, simultaneously determining each other's price and quantity.
And the foundation for this enormous intellectual structure was the marginal utility revolution, right? That had to come first.
Yes, the marginal revolution was the necessary starting point. He couldn't have done it without that. Walras derived individual demand and utility curves, establishing the core concept that value is rooted not in labor, but in scarcity relative to needs.
The marginal utility concept.
Exactly. And what's truly striking is that his results, which he developed in total isolation in Lausanne, agreed fundamentally with the simultaneous independent discoveries of Karl Menger in Austria and William Stanley Jevons in England.
And the fact that three thinkers, all working independently, arrived at the same fundamental principle, that value is determined at the margin. That must have suggested to Schumpeter that the structure Walras found was an objective, inevitable scientific truth. Not just some clever construction. It was an economic law, just waiting to be formalized.
It confirmed the potential for economics to be an exact science. But Walras's great leap forward wasn't just discovering the marginal utility curve itself. Lots of people were converging on that. It was integrating that curve into a gigantic interlocking system of simultaneous equations. That was the genius.
Okay, let's break down the pure logic of general equilibrium, because this is the immortal claim. If we're going to understand Schumpeter's praise, we have to get our heads around the mechanism. What exactly is the general equilibrium system solving for?
The objective of Walras's system is to show, mathematically, how an economy, under conditions of perfect competition and rational behavior, settles into a state where every single market is clear. In mathematical terms, this means demonstrating the possibility of a solution, the proof of existence, for a massive system of equations that links supply, demand, prices, and costs across all markets at the same time.
So we're not just talking about supply and demand for apples.
No.
We are talking about apples and the labor market for apple pickers and the land the apple trees grow on and the capital that built the trucks to transport them and every other market.
Precisely. All of it. Walras's system has four major sets of markets that must all clear simultaneously. First, the market for consumer goods. Second, the market for productive services, that's your land, labor, capital. Third, the market for capital formation, which is investment. And fourth, the market for money itself. And the system proves mathematically that the total receipts you get from selling factors of production, all the wages, rents, profits, must exactly equal the total receipts from the sales of all consumer goods. Everything clears, everything balances. You reach an overall equilibrium.
And what are the necessary conditions for this mathematical closure? What are Walras's two core assumptions that make this whole thing work?
They're deceptively simple but incredibly powerful. First, every economic unit seeks to maximize its utility. We call this rational behavior. Consumers want to maximize satisfaction. Producers want to maximize profits. Second, the crucial market condition. For every good or service in the system, supply must equal demand.
Market clearance.
The requirement for simultaneous market clearance. If you have, say, N goods, you need N equations to solve for the N prices, plus all the equations to make sure that everyone's budget constraints are met. It's a huge system.
That sounds just unbelievably complex. And he was doing this in the 1870s and 80s, long before we had any kind of widespread computing power.
Yes. The sheer intellectual complexity is why Schumpeter held him so high. Walras essentially established the framework for mathematical tractability in economics. He was the first to show that the relationships between all these economic variables could be captured in a unified, mathematically closed system. This basically validated the entire trajectory of formal economic modeling. He laid the blueprints for how economic theory is constructed today, moving the discipline from, philosophical treatises to a formal science.
That makes the theoretical physics comparison much clearer now. It's about finding the universal laws of structure, like gravity holding a solar system together. Walras found the economic equivalent of a stationary, perfectly balanced universe.
Exactly. And Schumpeter was impressed because Walras didn't just stop at simple exchange and consumption. He integrated concepts that often trip up simpler models, particularly capitalization.
How did Walras deal with capitalization and the creation of new wealth within this static model? That sounds inherently dynamic, not static.
It is challenging to fit into a static model, you're right, but Walras managed it. He did it by solving for the derivation of capital values from the base of the services they provide. So instead of treating a capital good, like a machine, as simply an output that cost X amount of labor to build, which was the classical view, Walras derived the value of that machine based on the discounted stream of future services it will provide.
Ah, okay. The foundation of modern finance, basically.
The absolute foundation of modern financial valuation. He showed how saving and investment decisions lead to new capital goods, and how the value of those capital goods is derived endogenously from within the system itself.
That's a huge shift. It links the market for productive services to the market for investment. It ties the whole system together and ensures that even the decision to save or invest is subject to the same utility-maximizing logic.
And then there's the problem of money. Economists often find money very difficult to integrate into pure exchange models because money is held for reasons other than immediate consumption or investment, right? It's a medium of exchange, a store of value.
So how did Walras get around that difficulty?
He developed a comprehensive theory of money within the pure exchange framework. He dealt with two key concepts: necessary circulation, circulation à désirer, and the demand for payments, à césirer. He didn't view money as something mystical. He related the demand for holding money, the cash balance you want to keep available, to diminishing marginal utility.
So just like the marginal utility of eating an extra piece of bread diminishes, the marginal utility of holding an extra dollar in your wallet also diminishes.
Precisely. The convenience you gain from that next unit of cash decreases. And this allowed him to treat the demand for money, for cash balances, just like the demand for any other consumption good. It integrated it perfectly into the general equilibrium system. He was able to work out the whole of pure economics, resting on just those two core conditions: utility maximization and market clearance for every single thing, good, service, and even money. This comprehensive, internally consistent, mathematically rigorous framework, this architecture, is what Schumpeter deemed the highest achievement in the history of economic thought.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have established Walras's technical brilliance. I think we're clear on that. But if Walras achieved such a rigorous, elegant system, the foundation of modern economics, why is Marx, whom Schumpeter admitted was less rigorous scientifically, the one whose name is instantly recognizable all over the globe? Why is Marx often taught as a powerful theory of change? The answer has to lie in that massive philosophical chasm Schumpeter identified. They defined what economics should be in two completely different ways.
We have to return to that statics versus dynamics divide. It's the whole key. Marx attempted to explain change and development, economic evolution as a distinct historical and revolutionary process. His whole focus was on the internal contradictions of capitalism that would inevitably lead to its collapse. His work addressed the ultimate social and political destination of humanity.
His work had a deep moral and political resonance that Walras's purely abstract equations could never, ever touch.
Correct. Walras, on the other hand, aimed to create the theoretical apparatus for understanding statics, the instantaneous, pure, logical interdependence of quantities, completely stripped of any historical or sociological baggage. Marx wanted a total vision of society driven by economic structure. Walras wanted a science comparable to physics, aiming only for logical truth, not policy outcomes or prophetic fulfillment.
But Schumpeter himself was a complex thinker who believed in the importance of dynamics and evolution. I mean, his own great work, Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy, is essentially a dynamic theory of creative destruction. So he obviously recognized the need for both elements, the vision and the technique.
Oh, he absolutely did. He believed that real progress in economics required both. It required vision, that sweeping evolutionary scope that Marx certainly possessed, and technique, the rigorous analytical tools that Walras mastered.
Then why the final verdict favoring Walras? Why call him the greatest?
Because Schumpeter saw Walras's method as the necessary foundation for any future scientific progress. Marx's vision was powerful, but ultimately it was a detour from scientific rigor. His conclusions were often flawed technically. They stem from his adherence to labor theory of value that Walras, Jevons, and Menger proved was, well, scientifically unsustainable. Walras, by focusing only on pure theory, ensured his work was a robust foundation regardless of the immediate political payoff.
So it's like Marx offered a flawed but very ambitious blueprint for a future house.
While Walras built the perfect, unshakable foundation for any house that might be built later. That's a great way to put it.
Can you give us a specific example of a technical flaw Schumpeter would have focused on in Marx's work, and contrast that with Walras's rigor?
Certainly. Schumpeter noted that Marx's entire framework relied on the classical labor theory of value, the idea that the value of a commodity is determined by the socially necessary labor time embedded in it. Walras's marginal utility theory, which became the modern consensus, showed that value is subjective. It's determined by demand at the margin relative to scarcity. By building his system on the technically sound marginal utility concept and simultaneous market clearance, Walras's model was mathematically verifiable and internally consistent. That's something Marx's labor theory-based system fundamentally failed to be, especially when dealing with capital accumulation and varying rates of profit. Walras just avoided that technical trap entirely by focusing on interdependence rather than intrinsic value.
And the result of this methodological divide, it manifests so clearly in their audiences and their impact. Marx's success was attributed in large part to his prophetic message, a religious substitute, as Schumpeter put it. The immortality he won was in the historical and political sense. It served as a system of ultimate ends and a guide to action for millions of people.
Whereas Walras's success was purely intellectual and academic, he was incredibly difficult to read if you weren't a mathematician. As Schumpeter noted, his work was considered too mathematical, too theoretical by those influential English and American economists like Marshall. That is, until the mid-20th century when mathematical economics finally achieved dominance. So the influence Walras exerted was indirect. It was through the framework he provided to subsequent generations of model builders.
And yet, that legacy endured. Walras created the foundational infrastructure for the discipline. His successor at Lausanne, Vilfredo Pareto, continued and extended the work, creating a famous school of thought, which proved that the foundation Walras laid was fertile ground for rigorous, ongoing scholarship. It wasn't a dead-end abstraction, but a living system.
And if we connect this all to the bigger picture, Walras represents the ideal of economics as a rigorous abstract science. It was cold, it was isolated, and it was initially unrecognized, but it provided the necessary architectural blueprint for modern thought.
So Schumpeter's ranking makes perfect sense through this technical lens. Walras's enduring legacy is precision and elegance. He established the scientific framework that allows economists to understand how the entire market system rests, the statics. And this rigorous understanding of the stationary state is necessary before you can even begin to address how the system moves and changes, the dynamics, which was Marx's focus.
Exactly. The system of doctrines Walras developed rests on a general validity. It is universally applicable logic that stands outside of time and place. By calling Walras the greatest, Schumpeter affirmed his belief that foundational scientific rigor, the pursuit of pure mathematical truth, is the highest intellectual achievement in the discipline, and that it surpasses even the sweeping, politically powerful vision of a figure like Marx.
So Walras gave us the language of modern macroeconomics. He created the perfect, elegant machine. And Marx created the engine of history, messy and powerful, but ultimately requiring serious technical refinement and, often leading to historical misinterpretations.
Which raises an important question for you, the listener, to mull over. Marx and Walras both created these complete systems for understanding capitalism. Walras's system is still the analytical foundation of modern economic teaching. It's the baseline model used in virtually every graduate program, whereas Marx's is primarily used in sociology, political history, and historical critique. So this raises an important question. Do the greatest achievements in economics necessarily correspond to the theories that solve immediate problems or acquire the largest political following? Or are the greatest achievements those that merely provide the most elegant and universally applicable logical apparatus, sacrificing immediate applicability for eternal structural truth? Is elegance or percolability the true measure of scientific greatness?